The first speaker is Tess Keehn. Now, Tess is an architect of peace, is a retired mental health clinician. She's the author of Alchemical Inheritance. She's a dream tender, life coach, and a seeker of enlightenment. She shares her passion for global harmony by writing, speaking, and working with groups and individuals to achieve greater personal peace, leading to global peace. Today, she's going to talk to us about the Alchemy of Peace. Please welcome Tess Keehn.
Thank you, JG. Thank you so much. And thank all of you for being here on this beautiful spring day. I just want to celebrate the renewal and rebirth that's evident in all of us in this season that comes every year as such a gift. I am Tess Keehn, and I'm here to talk to you about the Alchemy of Peace, which has its roots in alchemy itself, which in turn has its roots in ancient history. Alchemy, as the pursuit of knowledge, extended across many cultures and many centuries before the pre-Renaissance European version I'm going to tell you about today. The alchemy is basically designed, the goal of alchemy was threefold, but the goal I'm going to talk about today was the focus on transforming base metals such as lead and sometimes mercury into the noble metals of silver and gold. Many people across Europe were interested in this, and again, in the pre-Renaissance times, there were many different attempts with varying ingredients and varying quantities. So precise record keeping became part of the discipline of exploring this way. Also, because so many people were so very interested in the possibility of taking common materials and making them into something as valuable as gold, the idea and the interest in replicating other people's studies also came into focus. I think it's worth noting that precise record keeping and the ability to replicate results are cornerstones of our modern scientific method of inquiry or investigation. But alchemy has a lot more poetry than the pure science of chemistry that would come from it. To illustrate, let me introduce you to Tom. Tom is a good citizen of merry old England, where it's often damp and dank in, say, the 11th century. And he's a very interested man, interested in the ideas of his day, and also a very hard worker, probably a tradesman, because he has a little bit of disposable income left after he pays to feed and clothe and house his family and himself. So, imagine one evening he arrives at the pub where he's sharing a brew with his neighbors and having some conversation, when into the pub walks a stranger who goes to the barman, orders a drink, and begins to converse with others near him. Now Tom overhears the word alchemy, and being the curious individual that he is, he slides down the bar a little bit and inserts himself into the conversation. And by the end of the night, he's made the fine acquaintance of this stranger, who has told him a little bit about the activities and the elements involved in pursuing alchemy. So the next night, Tom meets the stranger in his rooms, probably above the cobblers or the bakers or something, where the stranger has put out some materials on the table, a bowl, a source of low heat, and a stir stick. And Tom comes in and money changes hands because he's buying elements. He's got to buy the base metal, the lead, and perhaps he buys some magnesium or even sulfur or possibly even phosphorus, and even some very inexpensive elements such as salt. And Tom is a very diligent student, and he's listened well, so he's taking notes on exactly what he's going to add into the bowl and in what order and what quantity. And the bowl's beginning to heat up as he puts his elements in, and the stranger offers him the stir stick. And Tom is very excited now. He takes the stir stick and he immerses it into the semi-molten metal in the bowl, And he's very conscious about which direction he's going to turn and how many times, because he wants to write it down later, because that's also part of the belief that these things matter in how things proceed. So there's Tom with his stir stick in the bowl, and he stirs 3 times clockwise and 1 time counterclockwise, and he was going to go again, but he's astonished because he sees a silver bead there in the bowl. He's so excited that he may have created silver. And indeed, the stranger is also excited. He pulls the silver bead out and conducts a quick assay and verifies that, yes, it is in fact a bead made of silver. Tom is elated, and he makes arrangements to come back as soon as he can set aside some funds to buy more materials to try again, because if making silver is this easy, gold must just be one more experiment away. So Tom leaves the room that night, going out into a dark night, a dark road, in a dark world, but he's a happy man because he has hope. And the stranger, meanwhile, is clearing up the supplies, putting things away. He's already cleaned out the bowl. And then he picks up the stir stick to clean it, and he wipes it off. And he comes to the stirring end, and he very carefully wipes off the little cup in the end, makes sure it's very clean. Then he goes to his cabinet and gets a little silver bead and puts it in the cup and covers the whole thing with wax. And he's ready for his next mark. But Tom went home hopeful, and that's not without value. So I don't tell you the story to focus on the fraud, but in fact, when I think about it, it seems likely that the fraud probably added to the longevity of the efforts of alchemists across Europe and into the into the Middle East, Far East, and even down into the Muslim world of Northern Africa and the Middle East, of course. But I tell you this story because I think it illustrates something that's very vital to all of us and may have something to do with why we're all here today. And that is, I'm so excited to find this in this story. It's the simple human belief in the ability for transformation. And I've always been fascinated by the concept, which various ministers and others have shared with me, that consciousness itself is evolving. And so when I read about history and look back into even the deep, dark history, which I'm kind of really interested in, I wonder if the mere belief in transformation in the 11th century human beings, 1,000 years ago, if that perhaps gave rise to the possibility that there could be freedom from the oppression of European society in a new world that then would embrace the thoughts from the Eastern world to create the uniquely American transcendental movement that changed thought in ways that made us all able to expand and explore new vistas in our lives. I just find it fascinating that there might be a connection. So I know that we've all had opportunities to transform aspects of our own lives, or at least I would guess most of us, maybe our circumstances, or maybe even our personalities. I know I've had a few of those myself. But I want to share with you just real briefly a kind of different sort of transformation that I encountered about a year ago, January of last year, as I was sitting looking at the mess of boxes and some file folders stuck in there that was under my desk. It was the beginning of the year, and the beginning of every year I want to clean everything out, and some years I do, some years I don't so much. Anyway, I decided, those boxes contain notes and file folders and photocopies of newspaper articles, all about the book that I've been writing for 20 years. Or maybe I should say the book that I was going to write for 20 years. I have been working on it for a long time, and I sat in that moment and thought, this is the year. I either write it or I throw all this stuff away. So I set the goal to finish writing my book. And I was actually recommitting to a goal that had been in my vision statement for several years. And, it's not a good thing to make an agreement with the universe by writing something in a vision statement and then go off track to getting it. It's just not a good idea. So it was time to get my book done, and I knew at least that I would write it. At the time, I had no idea whether I would ever publish it or how widely I would publish it or any of that. I just set that aside, knowing that I would know at a later time. In fact, I knew at age 14 that I would write this book, but I had to live into my 60th year to accomplish the personal work and the healing and gain the perspective to write a book that's about some sad things, but to write it from the perspective of hope and encouragement. Alchemical Inheritance is the title that came once I made this recommitment. I woke up one morning with that clearly in my head, and I had been wondering what the title would be. It had had several. But once that came, I got busy and was working on a manuscript to tell the story of my grandmother's untimely demise, sudden and tragic, how that affected my mother, and then when she became pregnant very shortly thereafter with me, how all of those things may have affected me in the womb and beyond into my life. Through my life, around 40, I graduated from graduate school and became a licensed mental health provider. So I had a lot of understanding about the psychology of all of this. And in my life, I'd also, like probably everyone in this room, pursued spiritual avenues for finding greater self-awareness, enlightenment, more peace in my own soul. So then my career ended, kind of suddenly and a little bit before I was ready for it. But then that opened up the gift of time to write the book. So somewhere along the way, make sure I got everything in here. Oh, I wanted to tell you that there were a million reasons to not write the book. You know how it is with chatter when we're trying to do anything that really pushes us outside our comfort zone. You know, who would be interested? Why would I even believe anyone would be interested? And I was really surprised and amused one day when I caught my ego telling me I was being egotistical to write the book. That somehow seems like something an ego wouldn't say, like it wouldn't really want to know that about itself. So at that point I was able to just kind of let it all go. And I just knew I had to finish the writing. And then, of course, as life would have it, when the universe is supporting us in our goals, because this is the way it happens, right? When we put something in a vision statement, things manifest for us. I learned that my dear friend had edited a book of another friend. I thought, well, I'm just going to ask her if she will take a look at mine. And she did. And I will never forget the day when she finished reading it, she called and said, "Oh, Tess, this is a story for the world." Okay, I knew I was going to publish it with her help and her support. So, where am I? Reverend Mary Ellen Ryder was that editor, is the editor, and couldn't be here today. But she holds, as I do, that my people who are going to benefit from my book, and my story, I should say, will end up with the book in their hands. There are people in the audience today who have read it, and yes, I have copies for sale. It's a paperback, it's $16, and it's a couple hundred pages. It's not the happiest read, but again, it's a book about hope and encouragement. And it's really intended for all of us who either are facing or have been through those dark nights of the soul, or those periods of time when day after day we wake up to a dim dawn that offers only uncertainty. I'm hopeful that my book will help such people pull through, stay the course, and do the work, and heal. So, just as important as, well, less important than selling books today, even more important, I wanted to ask you to look at the possibility that you have an alchemical inheritance as well. I am wondering if it's possible, likely, that there's some set of elements that each of us comes into this lifetime with that we are destined and determined to heal. That our lives, that the circumstances into which we're born provide us the challenge to live lives of choice, to make choices in the living of our lives that will heal those circumstances and thereby grow our souls. I think it's a worthwhile endeavor to do just that, to be here to grow our souls, even as we're driving cars and having careers and balancing bank books and raising families. In fact, I guess I say in the book, I believe we're growing our souls regardless. It's the choices we make that impacts the direction of that growth. So I wonder if you want to take a look back at your life to date and see if you can find any of those little silver beads, not placed there by some charlatan from the Dark Ages, but lovingly dropped there by spirit, by inspiration. And if you want to, at our break, there is an opportunity to mingle with others. And if you wanted to share any of those little beads or pearls with one another, you're certainly welcome to. But you're not, under no obligation. You certainly don't have to. But I would really encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at what those times were, to really celebrate those milestones, those thresholds, those periods or times in your life when you really knew something deep about yourself. Sometimes these are the mystical experiences where we feel like we really are in direct contact with spirit. And sometimes they're just the words of a stranger on the bus, But to take a time to look at those and to know them and to be grateful for knowing them. I think this is the alchemy of peace, the ability to live free, to live an examined life with this knowledge of the self, with the ego on board, and yet not being driven by the ego or its ego defense mechanisms. Many of you know the song with the chorus, "Let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me." I know I set out every day to live that truth, and most days I fail at least a little bit. But it doesn't stop me from getting up with enthusiasm to live that truth in every tomorrow. To really let peace begin with me, I have to be free from the emotional reactivity that would have me seeing argument and attack from every corner of existence to keep me in perpetual victim mode. That means healing the assumptions and mistaken perceptions that have been with me since I was young. And I think most of us have done work on that road, and many of us have gotten to a place of feeling pretty good about that. And yet still the projections can come in, or even worse, I can realize they're going out. Oh, when they're coming in and going out, that's when the chaos and kerfuffle in life happens. And the more I can bring my awareness to the reality that this is just projection, it's just projected subconscious material, then I cannot take it personally, and I can remain peaceful even in the most intense argument. And you can too. This notion of projection, again, is my most powerful ally in maintaining a peaceful outlook. And projection, as you probably know, is one of the several ego defense mechanisms coined and conceived by Sigmund Freud. Whatever we think about Sigmund, we do have to give him credit. He discovered the unconscious, so he gets to call the ego defense mechanisms. But Carl Jung came along after and established projection. It helped us know more about it through the concept of the shadow, that the attributes that we do not want to own or live up to, we project out onto others. So I've been studying this notion of projected subconscious material most recently through the avenue of dream tending, dreams being the absolute fertile ground of our subconscious material, projected into images which we can then decode and unravel in groups of loving companions. So, where am I? I think this capacity to not take things personally, which many of you will remember from the Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, such simple concepts, and we've heard this before, simple but not easy to put into place. I think that capacity to not take things personally may be the gold that all the alchemists in us have been seeking. And so I thank you for your kind attention today. I believe there's going to be some time for questions, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, if anybody has a question, I will hand you the microphone. Or would like to make a comment about her speech.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a praise or a compliment.
It's inspiring.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Here, Sandy's got a... No? Well, it helps for our recording purposes.
I just have a testimony
Oh.
to Tess, having read her book. I was overwhelmed with the tenacity that she had in looking for her answers and in finding her peace and in discovering the path she needed to take. I was absolutely overwhelmed with this. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and a very important one, I believe, for most people. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. My goodness. Thank you so much.
Would you be willing to share a little bit more? I'm intrigued by your grandmother's demise. I don't know if you'd be willing to go a little deeper into that.
Well, you have to read the book, but let me say in response to Sandy, on the one hand, we have only this life. On the other hand, we have many lives. But we have only this opportunity to grow our souls in this lifetime in the company of these wonderful beings around us. So the tenacity that came was out of that desire to just take full advantage of this lifetime. So I encourage, of course, all of you to do that. I know we encourage one another because we try, we forget, we get off track, and we bring each other on track by coming to Sacramento Soul Talks and going to church and finding one another in the community in various capacities. So thank you. To answer RJ's question, you find out early in the book that my grandmother actually was murdered in West Texas in a rather sensational crime in 1955. And the story goes from there. Can't say very much about it because I will give away the story. But that aspect of the story is detailed in the first 3 chapters. And, you know, to some of us who are interested in murder mysteries, it's not very spiritual, but I've always loved murder mysteries. Probably because of this, but I don't really know. It's a fairly interesting first few chapters, but if you're not all that interested and don't want to be thinking and reading about people who have, you know, questionable morals that would commit a crime like this, then just kind of breeze through the 3 chapters and know that that happened and my mother was affected by it in a personal way, and that she became pregnant with me within 10 days of finding out about her mother's death. So the whole question of being steeped in grief while I was in there cooking, it comes to mind. And I won't say more about that except to say that from chapter 4 on is really the journey to healing and wholeness and the realization. But you know what we say, it's not from point A to point B, it's a very circuitous path, and other stuff happened and life unfolds, and thank you God that it does. So, all right. Anything else? Yes.
Tess, you said something about that the book was in you ever since you were a child. What was the defining moment that got you to actually sit down and write the book? Like so many of us think we have a book to put out and we just procrastinate. What was your defining moment?
You know, thank you for asking that. I married late in my life. I was 40 when I married, and within the first few years of that time, I had this wonderful experience of realizing that committing to someone didn't take away my freedom, it enhanced my freedom. And there was the support of my husband and the existence of a computer where I could take notes, and I was working different part-time jobs, so I had a little bit of time, and that's when I did the newspaper research about the crime. But I want to address something that you didn't ask, which is at 14, what happened was my mother was trying to tell me about this without really telling me very much about it, you know, how that can be. And I knew I would write about the crime, but I didn't know really anything about the crime except a couple of facts until I did that research. And so I think I just finally had the freedom and the ability to take the time to get the book started. But then I got married in 95, so that was probably 1997 or 8. I say in the introduction, but I've actually forgotten myself when I did that research. And then life got busy, and career got bigger, and then all of a sudden it's 18 years later, I'm like, oh, I got to do this book. What happened? What happened to the time? So, thank you.